The city was a giant, noisy machine that never seemed to stop. It was made of tall gray buildings, endless roads filled with honking cars, and crowds of people moving like a fast river. Everyone was in a hurry. They looked at their watches or their phones, rushing to get to offices or to catch buses. In the middle of all this noise and rushing, there was a small girl walking alone. She looked very small compared to the tall buildings and the grown-ups walking past her. She was 10 years old, though she looked even younger because she was so thin. Her hair was messy and pulled back into a tight ponytail to keep it out of her face. Her clothes did not fit her right. The shirt she wore was too big, hanging loosely off her shoulders, and the pants were frayed at the bottom. She had found them in a big bin of old clothes behind a shop a few weeks ago. They were clean, but they were not warm. The air was starting to get cold. It was autumn, the time of year when the wind bites at your nose and fingers. The girl wrapped her arms around herself as she walked, trying to keep her body heat inside. She didn't have a jacket. The wind found its way through the thin fabric of her shirt and made her shiver. She walked with her head down, watching her old sneakers hit the pavement. One of the shoes had a small hole near the toe, and she could feel the cold ground every time she took a step. Her stomach was the loudest thing about her. Even though the city was noisy with sirens and shouting, all she could hear was the growling inside her belly. It was an empty feeling, a hollow ache that hurt. She hadn't eaten anything since the morning before, and that had just been a small piece of bread she found on a bench. She was hungry in a way that made her feel tired and dizzy, but she kept walking. She had to keep moving. The girl wasn't just walking to get somewhere. She was hunting, but not for animals. She was hunting for a chance. She moved away from the busiest streets where the cars zoomed by too fast to notice anyone. She turned a corner and walked toward a part of the city where there were cafes and restaurants with tables outside on the sidewalk. This was the place where people slowed down. This was where people had money. As she walked, she kept her eyes open. She saw a piece of cardboard sticking out of a recycling bin on the corner. It was part of a box that probably held bottles of soda. It was flattened and clean. She reached in and grabbed it. This was important. It was her tool for the day. She found a quiet spot between two brick walls to look at her treasure. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small black piece of charcoal. She had found it near an old fireplace in an abandoned lot. She had kept it for a long time, waiting for the right moment. Now, holding the cardboard against the rough brick wall, she began to write. She didn't know how to spell many long words, and her handwriting was shaky because her hands were cold. But she wrote slowly and carefully. She pressed the charcoal into the cardboard until the letters were thick and black. She had to make sure people could read it from far away. When she was done, she blew on the cardboard to clear away the loose charcoal dust. The message was simple. It wasn't asking for money. It wasn't asking for help. It was a trade. She held the sign up to look at it. It felt heavy in her hands, heavier than just a piece of paper should feel. With the sign under one arm, she continued walking until she reached a plaza filled with the smell of roasted coffee and fresh pastries. It smelled wonderful, like a warm hug, but it also made her stomach hurt even more. She saw a bistro with a low black fence around it. There were tables filled with people wearing nice coats. They were drinking from white cups and eating food off of real plates. They looked happy. The girl stood near the fence, just a few feet away from where the people were eating. She felt invisible at first. People walked by her on the sidewalk without looking down. A waiter in a white apron walked past her carrying a tray full of food. He smelled like soap and food. She watched him serve a plate of eggs and toast to a man in a gray suit. The man didn't look up. He just took a bite of his food and looked at his phone. She waited for a moment. Her heart was beating fast, thumping against her ribs like a bird trapped in a cage. She was scared. She was afraid that someone would yell at her to go away. She was afraid that the police might come and move her along. That had happened before, but the hunger was stronger than the fear. The hunger pushed her forward. She stepped right up to the edge of the restaurant's outdoor area. She didn't say anything. She didn't hold out a hand for coins. She simply lifted the piece of cardboard and held it against her chest. She stood very still, trying to look neat, despite her messy clothes and dirty face. At first, nobody noticed. They were too busy talking about their jobs or their plans for the weekend. Then, a woman wearing a red scarf looked up from her magazine. Her eyes landed on the girl, then moved down to the sign. She stopped chewing her bagel. Her eyebrows went up, and she looked confused. She read the words once, then twice. Next to her, a man in a blue jacket saw the woman looking. He turned his head to see what she was staring at. He saw the girl. He saw the big coat that didn't belong to her, the old sneakers, and the dirty hands holding the sign. He read the charcoal letters. The mood at the table changed. The people stopped talking. The waiter, the water, who was coming over to refill water glasses, noticed the silence. He saw the girl standing there. Usually when street children came this close, he would walk over and tell them to leave, or he would wave his hand to shoo them away. It was the rule. They weren't supposed to bother the customers. He started walking toward her with a firm look on his face, but then he stopped. He saw the sign. He read what she had written. It didn't say, "Please help." It didn't say, "I need money." It said something different. It was a question. A fair question. The waiter stood still. He looked from the sign back to the girl's face. She wasn't crying. She wasn't smiling. She was just looking at them with eyes that were too old for a 10-year-old. She was waiting for an answer. The wind blew a strand of hair across her face, but she didn't move to brush it away. She just held the sign tight against her chest. More people at the nearby tables began to notice. A hush started to spread, small at first, like a ripple in a pond. The people in the gray suit put down his phone. A couple stopped laughing. They all looked at the girl standing by the fence. They looked at her clothes and the dust on her skin, but mostly they looked at the sign she held. The city noise seemed to fade away for that small group of people. There was only the girl and her question. She wasn't asking for a hand up. She was offering to work. She was offering something she had, something inside her, in exchange for something they had plenty of. The waiter took a step back instead of forward. He crossed his arms, the frown leaving his face. He looked at the owner of the restaurant, who was standing inside the big glass window. The owner was looking out, watching the scene. The waiter looked back at the girl and gave a tiny, almost invisible nod. The girl saw it. She took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking a little, but she tightened her grip on the cardboard. This was it. They were looking. They were listening. She had to show them she could do it. She closed her eyes for a second to find the courage, and then she opened her mouth to sing. The girl stood there, her feet planted firmly on the cold pavement, clutching her piece of cardboard like a shield. The air between the iron fence and the dining tables felt thick, heavy with something that wasn't just the smell of coffee and exhaust. The waiter, who had been ready to chase her away just a moment ago, stood frozen. His hand was still half raised, but his fingers had uncurled. He was looking at her face now, not at her clothes. The silence was strange for this part of the city. Usually, this place was a cacophony of clattering silverware, shouted orders, and the constant roar of engines. But now the people at the nearest tables had stopped eating. A man in a sharp suit, who had been typing furiously on his laptop, let his hands fall into his lap. The woman with the red scarf slowly lowered her magazine. They were all looking at the sign. They were reading the question written in smudged charcoal. "If I sing well, will you give me a plate of food?" It was such a simple, direct question. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a sob story designed to make them feel guilty about their wealth. It was a business proposal. She had a product, and she wanted to buy the product with it. The transaction felt incredibly honest, and that honesty disarmed them. They were used to ignoring people who asked for money because they didn't know where the money would go. But here, the deal was clear. A song for a meal. A few people further back, who hadn't read the sign yet, started to whisper. They wondered why a waiter was staring at a little girl and why the front tables were so quiet. But when someone leaned over and whispered the words on the cardboard to them, the whispers stopped. The skepticism melted away, replaced by a wide-eyed curiosity. The waiter looked past the girl, through the large glass window of the restaurant. He caught the eye of the owner. The owner was a big man with a graying beard, usually found shouting at the cooks or counting bills. But today, he was standing still behind the counter, wiping his hands on a white towel. He didn't wave his hand to shoo the girl away. He didn't point to the no loitering sign on the glass wall. He just watched. He gave a slow, barely noticeable nod. Seeing this, the waiter relaxed his shoulders. He took a step back, giving the girl space. He didn't say anything, but his body language changed from defensive to attentive. He became a listener, just like everyone else. The girl saw the change. She felt the atmosphere shift from hostile to waiting. It was a fragile moment. If she made a wrong move, or if she tried to grab something, the spell would break, and the harsh reality of the city would come rushing back in. She knew she had to be careful. She took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill her lungs. It tasted like dust and car fumes, but she didn't care. She needed that air to steady her racing heart. She looked out at the crowd. These were people who had everything. They had warm coats, full bellies, and soft beds to go home to. She had nothing but her voice. It was the only thing of value she owned. It was the only currency she had left. She hoped it was enough. She hoped her voice wasn't rusty from lack of use. She hadn't sung properly in weeks, not since the shelter got too crowded and loud to practice. She closed her eyes for a brief second. She needed to block out the visual distractions. She needed to forget the fancy cars and the expensive watches. She needed to go back to a place in her memory where things were simpler. She thought of a melody she knew, a song that was older than the city buildings. It was a slow, sad tune that didn't need fancy music to sound good. It just needed heart. When she opened her eyes again, she didn't look at the people individually. She looked through them, or maybe past them, focusing on a point in the distance. She adjusted her grip on the sign, holding it slightly lower so it wouldn't block her face. She wanted them to see her. She wanted them to know who was singing. A man at a nearby table cleared his throat, nervous suddenly. He felt like everyone was holding their breath. The wind picked up, rustling the plastic menu covers on the tables, but no one moved to hold them down. All eyes were fixed on the small, thin figure standing on the other side of the low fence. The girl didn't count down. She didn't say 1, 2, 3. She simply parted her lips and let the sound out. At first, the sound was small and tentative, like a tiny bird testing the air. It floated over the fence and landed softly on the ears of the diners. It was a pure, clear note that seemed to cut through the background noise of the traffic effortlessly. The people leaned in closer. They strained their ears to catch the sound. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct. Then, she found her rhythm. She began to sing the first verse. The words were in a language that some didn't recognize, but the emotion was universal. It was a song about the sun coming out after a long winter, about finding water in a desert. It was a song of hope, but sung with a deep, resonant sadness that only someone who has truly suffered could express. Her voice grew stronger with each word. It wasn't the polished voice of a pop star on the radio. It wasn't auto-tuned or perfect. It wavered slightly at the high notes, cracked a little with emotion, and had a rough, earthy texture to it. It sounded real. It sounded human. It sounded like a voice that had seen hard times but hadn't given up. The effect on the crowd was instant. A few people actually put down their forks completely. The food on their plates, which had seemed so important a few minutes ago, suddenly looked trivial. The woman in the red scarf brought her hand up to her chest, right over her heart. Her eyes widened, reflecting a mixture of surprise and pain. She hadn't expected this. She had expected a screechy nursery rhyme or a timid mumble. She didn't expect to feel something. The song wasn't flashy. There were no dance moves. The girl stood stock still, her only movement being the rise and fall of chest as she breathed. But the sound she produced was filling up the space. It bounced off the brick walls and the glass windows. It wrapped around the tables and ensnared the listeners. It demanded their attention without asking for it politely. A young couple who had been arguing quietly about money when the girl first walked up stopped talking immediately. They looked at each other, then at the girl. The anger drained out of their faces, replaced by a shared realization of their own petty problems compared to the hunger standing before them. Even the people walking by on the sidewalk, who were not part of the restaurant crowd, stopped. A businessman carrying a briefcase halted mid-stride. He turned his head to see where the beautiful sound was coming from. When he saw the source, a ragged child with a cardboard sign, he stopped walking entirely. He just stood there on the sidewalk, blocking the flow of foot traffic, causing others to stop and look too. A small audience was forming a semicircle around the girl, creating a private auditorium in the middle of the busy public plaza. The girl didn't notice the growing crowd. She was lost in the music. She was thinking about the plate of food she hoped to earn. She imagined it steaming hot, with maybe some chicken and mashed potatoes. She sang as if her life depended on it, because in a way, it did. Every note was a plea. Every melody was a negotiation. She was pouring her hunger into the song, using her emptiness to fill the air with sound. The waiter stood by the railing, his arms crossed, a look of profound respect on his face. He had heard street musicians before. He heard them every day. Most were playing cheap guitars or harmonicas, playing the same three songs over and over. But this was different. This was raw talent. This was a gift that the world had been cruel enough to let go unnoticed until now. The owner inside the restaurant stopped wiping the counter. He walked closer to the glass, his nose almost touching the window. He watched the girl's lips move. He watched the people outside. He saw a man reaching for his wallet, then stopping, realizing that money wasn't what she wanted. He saw the woman wipe a tear from her cheek. The owner felt a tightness in his own throat, a feeling he hadn't had in a long time. He realized that this wasn't just a nuisance. This was a moment. The girl was coming to the end of the verse. She held the last note, letting it hang in the cold air, vibrating and clear. It was a challenge. She was asking them, was that good enough? The note faded slowly, drifting away like smoke, leaving the street quieter than it had been all day. No one spoke. No one clapped. They just waited, holding their breath to see what would happen next. The silence was the loudest applause she could have received. The silence stretched out, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind of quiet that happens when something true has just been spoken, and nobody wants to be the first one to break the spell. The girl let the last note fade away until it was just a memory in the air. Her chest rose and fell deeply. She opened her eyes and looked around. For a second, she seemed to forget where she was, looking a bit startled to see so many people staring at her. She expected something. She didn't know what. Maybe a shout to leave, or a laugh. But the faces she saw weren't laughing. They were serious. Some people looked sad. Others looked amazed, like they had just seen a ghost do a backflip. The woman in the red scarf had one hand over her mouth, and her eyes were shiny, like she was holding back tears. The girl lowered her sign slightly. She felt a wave of shyness crash over her. All the confidence she had felt while singing evaporated, and she just felt small again. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. The cold wind reminded her that she was standing on a street corner, not on a stage. She looked down at her sneakers, waiting for a reaction. Nobody moved for a long 10 seconds. Then, a sound came from the back of the crowd. A man in a heavy coat clapped. It was a slow, loud clap. Just one person at first, then a woman near the fence joined in. Suddenly, the sound grew. It wasn't the polite golf clap. It was real applause. People started smiling, breaking the serious mood. They nodded at each other, acknowledging that they had all just heard something special. A younger man, maybe a college student, stood up from his table. He walked over to the iron fence. He didn't have any food in his hand, just a smartphone. He pointed it at her and hit a button. The girl flinched a little, worried he was taking a picture to make fun of her later, but he just gave her a thumbs up and kept recording. But the girl wasn't interested in fame or phones. Her stomach gave a loud, embarrassing growl that cut through the applause. She blushed, her cheeks turning red. She looked at the people eating and then lifted her sign again, pointing to the words, "Will you give me a plate of food? Will you give me a plate of food?" The applause died down as the people remembered the deal. This wasn't a concert. This was a transaction. The waiter, who had been watching with his arms crossed, stepped forward. He looked at the owner inside the restaurant one more time. The owner was making frantic shooing motions with his hands, but he wasn't shooing the girl away. He was shooing the waiter to get moving. The waiter nodded. He walked to the fence where the girl was standing. "You," the waiter said. His voice wasn't mean anymore. It was soft. "Wait right there." The girl froze. She didn't know if she was in trouble or not. She gripped the cardboard sign tighter, ready to run if she had to. But her legs were tired, and running seemed like a very hard thing to do right now. The waiter disappeared inside the kitchen. He came back out a moment later with the owner. The owner was a big, broad man with an apron tied around his waist. He wiped his hands on a towel as he walked. He looked scary, like someone who didn't take nonsense from anyone. The crowd parted to let him through. He walked up to the low iron fence and looked down at the girl. Up close, the girl saw that his face wasn't scary at all. He had deep lines around his eyes and kind of sad mouth. He looked at the dirty sign in her hands, then he looked at her face. He didn't smile, but he didn't frown either. "You have a loud voice for such a small body," the owner said. His voice was deep and rumbly. The girl didn't know what to say. She just nodded. "I heard you," he said. "Everyone heard you. That was a good song." He looked back at the tables where his customers were sitting. They were all watching him, waiting to see what he would do. He knew that if he turned this girl away, his customers would be angry. They had just been moved by her singing. They felt connected to her now. But more than that, the owner felt it himself. He had a daughter about the same age, sitting in a warm schoolroom right now. The thought made his heart ache. "A deal is a deal," the owner said simply. He reached into his apron pocket and pulled out a set of keys. He leaned over and unlocked the little latch on the iron gate. He swung the gate open with a squeak of metal. He motioned for her to come in. "Come," he said. The girl hesitated. She looked at the open gate, then at the crowd of people watching. She had stood outside this fence many times, smelling the food, wishing she could sit on the plush chairs. Now the gate was open, but she felt scared to step through. It felt like crossing into a different world. The waiter saw her hesitation. He smiled gently and opened the gate wider. "Come on, we want bite. We have pasta." The mention of pasta was enough to break her fear. Food. She stepped forward. Her old sneakers crunched on the pavement as she walked through the gate. She felt like she was walking onto holy ground. The restaurant patio was warmer than the street, blocked from the wind by glass panels. The owner guided her to a small table near the window, but not too close to the edge. It was a single table, usually meant for one person reading a book. He pulled out the chair. It was a metal chair with a cushion on it. It looked soft. "Sit," the owner commanded. The girl sat down carefully. She was afraid of getting the chair dirty. She tried to keep her dusty knees away from the fabric. She held her cardboard sign on her lap, not knowing what to do with it. The whole restaurant was watching. People were craning their necks to see. The girl felt very exposed. She hunched her shoulders, trying to make herself small. "You want a plate of food?" the owner asked. She nodded. "Yes, please." "What do you want to eat?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, please." "What do you want to eat?" he asked. She didn't know the menu. She didn't know what was expensive or what was cheap. She looked at a nearby table. A man was eating a steaming bowl of something that looked like red soup with meat in it. It smelled like garlic and spice. "That," the girl said, pointing. "Spaghetti bolognese," the owner said. "Good choice. It will warm you up." He turned to the waiter. "2 orders. 1 for her, and bring out a bowl of soup first, and some bread." The girl couldn't believe it. 2 orders, soup, and spaghetti? Bread. It seemed like a feast, enough for 3 people. Her mouth watered, and she had to swallow hard to keep from drooling. While they waited for the food, the girl sat awkwardly. She placed her sign face down on the table. The woman in the red scarf caught her eye. The woman smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. She raised her coffee cup in a silent toast to the girl. The girl managed a weak, nervous smile back. The waiter returned very quickly, carrying a large tray. He didn't make her wait. First, he placed a basket of warm bread on the table. The smell hit the girl instantly. It was yeasty and warm, the smell of safety. Next, he set down a bowl of minestrone soup, steaming hot. He put a spoon down next to it. "Eat," the waiter said. "It's hot. Be careful." The girl didn't need to be told twice. She picked up a piece of bread. It was soft and warm in her cold fingers. She took a bite. The taste was incredible. It was just bread, but to her, it tasted like the best thing in the world. She chewed quickly, her body waking up with the influx of carbohydrates. She then turned to the soup. She lifted the spoon with a slightly trembling hand. She blew on the red liquid to cool it down, then took a sip. The warmth spread down her throat and into her stomach. It felt like a heater turning on inside her chest. She closed her eyes for a moment, just enjoying the sensation. She forgot about the people watching. She forgot about the camera pointing at her. She forgot about the cold wind outside. There was only the soup, the bread, and the promise of more food coming. She ate with focus and speed, dipping the bread into the soup to soak up the broth. The owner stood by the kitchen door, watching her. He saw the way she ate. Not messy, just desperate. He saw the way her shoulders slowly dropped as the food filled her belly. He saw the tension leave her face. He nodded to himself, satisfied. "Keep the bowl full," he whispered to the waiter. "Let her eat." The girl looked up from her empty soup bowl just as the waiter returned with a massive plate of spaghetti. The noodles were piled high, covered in a rich, meaty sauce. There was even a sprinkle of cheese on top. It was beautiful. She looked at the owner, her eyes wide. She wanted to say thank you, but she didn't trust her voice not to crack. She just looked at him, hoping he could see the gratitude in her eyes. He saw it. He gave a small nod and went back inside to check on the kitchen. The girl picked up her fork. She twirled the noodles, getting a big bite with sauce and meat. She put it in her mouth. The flavor exploded: salty tomatoes, savory beef, the sharp bite of onion. It was so good, it almost made her want to cry. She ate bite after bite, the heat of the food making her nose run slightly. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, forgetting her manners for a second, then quickly stopped, looking around to see if anyone was grossed out. Nobody was. They were just watching, happy to see her eating. As she ate, the girl began to feel something else. It wasn't just the fullness in her stomach. It was a feeling of being seen. For a long time, she had felt like a shadow, something people looked through. But today, she had been heard, and now she was being fed. It was a powerful feeling. It made her feel like she mattered, just a little bit. She sat up a little straighter in the chair, no longer trying to hide her dirty clothes. She was a person who had earned her meal, and she was going to enjoy every bite. The plate of spaghetti was enormous, a mountain of noodles and red sauce that looked impossible for one small girl to finish. But she was trying her best. She twirled the fork with focused intensity, her eyes fixed only on the food. The sounds of the city, the honking horns, the sirens, the chatter of pedestrians had faded into the background. For her, the world had shrunk down to the metal table, the fork, and the warmth spreading through her body. The people at the nearby tables were watching, but they were trying to be subtle about it. They didn't stare openly anymore, afraid to make her feel self-conscious. Instead, they cast glances over their coffee cups and newspapers. It was a strange sight, a neatly dressed crowd of wealthy professionals, all captivated by the simple act of a hungry child eating. A man sitting 2 tables away put down his phone. He had been typing an email when the girl started singing, but he hadn't touched it since. He looked at his own breakfast of fancy pastry he had been excited about 5 minutes ago, and suddenly it didn't look very good. He pushed the plate away slightly, his appetite gone, replaced by a heavy feeling in his chest. He looked back at the girl. He was thinking about his own children at home. They had a full pantry, a fridge bursting with options, and yet they often complained about what was for dinner. He watched this girl, who had nothing, treat a simple plate of pasta like it was the best meal on earth. It made him feel a mix of guilt and gratitude that was hard to untangle. The woman in the red scarf wasn't hiding her emotions. She had wiped away a few stray tears with a napkin, but she kept looking at the girl with a soft, protective gaze. It wasn't just pity, it was admiration. She had heard the courage in that girl's voice when she stood alone by the fence. To stand in front of a crowd of strangers and offer your only talent in exchange for a meal was a brave thing to do. Most adults wouldn't have the guts to do that. The girl slowed down as the mountain of food shrank. Her initial desperate hunger was being satisfied. The sharp pangs in her stomach had stopped, replaced by a pleasant, heavy warmth. She started to taste the food more properly. The sauce was rich and savory. The pasta cooked just right so it was soft but not mushy. Every bite felt like healing. She used a piece of bread to wipe up the last bit of sauce on the plate, a habit she had learned to never waste a single drop. She popped the bread into her mouth and chewed slowly. She was full. Actually, she was stuffed. It was a feeling she hadn't had in a very long time, maybe months. It made her feel a little sleepy and very content. She leaned back in a chair, her hands resting on her stomach. For the first time since she arrived, she looked around at the people. She didn't look at them with fear or as a means to end goal. She just looked. Their faces changed when she made eye contact. The man who had pushed his pastry away gave her a small nod. The woman in the red scarf smiled again, a warm, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. Even the waiter, who was busy refilling water glasses at another table, caught her eye and winked. The girl felt a flush of happiness. It wasn't just the food, it was the realization that these strangers were on her side. They weren't looking down on her. In that moment, they were her fans. They were witnesses to her small victory. She looked down at the table. Her cardboard sign was still lying there, face down. She picked it up and turned it over. The charcoal letters were smudged now from her hands, but the words were still there. She traced the letters with her finger. "If I sing well, will you give me a plate of food?" The deal was done. She had sung, and they had given. It felt like a fair trade. Suddenly, the owner came out of the restaurant again. He had a white box in his hand, the kind used for takeout. He walked over to her table. The girl straightened up, wondering if she was in trouble for taking too long, or if they wanted her to leave now that she was done. The owner didn't look angry. He set the white box down on the table next to her empty plate. "You didn't finish it all," he said, nodding at the few strands of pasta left on the plate. "I'm full," the girl whispered. Her voice was a little raspy from singing and eating quickly. "Good," the owner said, "but you shouldn't waste the rest, and you'll be hungry later." He opened the box slightly. Inside were 2 large meatballs and a generous portion of garlic bread. "Take this with you. It's for later." The girl looked at the box, then up at the owner. She didn't know what to say. "Thank you," she managed to squeak out. "And this," the owner said. He reached into another pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a $20 bill. He held it out to her. The girl looked at the money, then at the food. She shook her head slowly. "I only wanted the food," she said, so I sang for the food. The owner paused. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the pride in her eyes. She wasn't a beggar. She was a worker. She had completed the job she agreed to do, and paying her extra felt like charity, which she clearly didn't want. "Just for the bread," the owner said gently, pushing the bill toward her. "Think of it as a tip. A singer always gets tips." The girl hesitated. She knew the money could help. It could buy water, or maybe a warmer pair of socks. Slowly, tentatively, she reached out and took the bill. She folded it carefully and tucked it deep into her shoe, the safest place she had. The owner nodded, satisfied. He stood there for a moment, looking out at his patio. The morning rush was over, but the atmosphere was different today. It was lighter. "You have a gift," the owner said to her, his voice low so only she could hear. "That voice of yours, it's special. Don't lose it." The girl looked down at her hands. "I don't have anywhere to practice," she mumbled. The owner looked around his plaza. It was busy, loud, and crowded. Not exactly a music studio. But he had an idea. He looked at the girl, then at the iron fence. "You come back," the owner said, "on Saturdays, in the morning before it gets too crazy. You stand there by the fence, you sing, and I will feed you a real meal every Saturday." The girl's eyes went wide. "Every Saturday. If you sing," the owner said, "a fair trade. 1 concert, 1 plate. Deal?" The girl felt a lump form in her throat, threatening to choke her. It wasn't just about the food anymore. Although knowing where her next meal was coming from was a huge relief, it was about having a place where she was expected. A place where she was expected. A place where she wasn't invisible. "Deal," she whispered. "Okay," the owner said, clapping his hands together once. "Now get going. It's hitting cold out here." He held the gate open for her as she gathered her things. She picked up the white box of food like it was made of gold. She slid out of the chair, feeling heavier and stronger than when she had walked in. As she walked back through the gate and onto the sidewalk, the patrons of the bistro didn't ignore her this time. As she passed, a few people nodded. A young man raised his hand in a small wave. The woman in the red scarf mouthed the words, "Good luck." The girl didn't run away this time. She walked with her head up. She held the box of food in one arm and her cardboard sign in the other. She didn't look like a scared ghost anymore. She looked like a musician who had just finished a successful set. She walked away from the warm terrace and back into the harsh concrete of the city. The wind was still blowing and it was still cold, but it didn't bite as much as before. She felt a fire inside her now, fueled by the pasta and the kindness of strangers. She had a job, she had a gig, and for the first time in a long time, the future didn't look so scary. She had a voice, and people were listening. The girl walked away from the bistro, clutching the white takeout box against her chest like it was a precious treasure. The warmth of the container seeped through her thin shirt, feeling better than any blanket she had ever touched. Her stomach felt heavy and content, a strange but wonderful feeling that made her walk a little slower, savoring the moment. The city didn't look as gray as it had an hour ago. The sun was trying to break through the clouds above, casting patches of light on the dirty sidewalk. She didn't go back to the busy intersection where she usually spent her days begging for spare change. Instead, she turned down a quiet side street, looking for a safe place to rest. She found a spot tucked away behind some large recycling bins, where the wind couldn't reach her. It wasn't pretty, and it smelled like old cardboard, but it was private. She sat down on an old crate and finally opened the white box. The smell of garlic and warm meat filled the air. She wasn't hungry anymore. Not really, but she knew she had to keep her strength up. She picked the garlic bread, eating small bites, chewing slowly. Every bite was a reminder of what had happened. The singing, the people watching, the owner opening the gate. It felt like a dream, but the taste of the food was very real. While she ate, she thought about the promise the owner had made. Every Saturday, just 2 words, but they changed everything. Before today, she had to worry about every single meal. She had to worry about where her next bite was coming from, or if she would have to go to sleep hungry again. But now, she had a plan. She had a guaranteed meal waiting for her once a week. It wasn't a lot, but it was something solid to hold on to. It was an anchor in a chaotic life. She finished the bread and carefully closed the box again, saving the meatballs for later. She leaned her head back against the brick wall and closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about her empty stomach. She was thinking about music. In her head, she went over the song she had sung. She remembered the fear she felt right before she started, and then the way the fear vanished when the sound came out. She remembered the looks on the people's faces. They weren't looking at her with pity. They were looking at her with respect. She realized then that her voice was more than just a way to get food. It was a way to be seen. It was a way to matter. The sun started to dip lower in the sky, and the air began to get colder again. The girl knew she couldn't stay there forever. She stood up, tucking the precious white box into her backpack to keep it safe. She adjusted her too big coat and stepped back out onto the main street. Over the next few days, things were different. The confidence she found at the bistro stayed with her. When she walked through the crowds, she didn't keep her eyes glued to the ground. She looked up. She saw things she hadn't noticed before, the way the light hit the windows, the colors of the scarves people wore, the rhythm of the city noise. It all felt a little less scary. Saturday morning came around faster than she expected. The girl woke up early in the shelter where she was staying. She washed her face as best as she could in the cold bathroom water, trying to make herself look presentable. She ran a comb through her hair, pulling it back into the neatest ponytail she could manage. She put on the cleanest clothes. She had a pair of jeans that were only a little bit too short and a sweater that didn't have any holes. She walked to the bistro with a nervous energy buzzing in her chest. What if they forgot? What if it was a mistake? What if the owner was just being nice because there were people watching? When she turned the corner and saw the plaza, her heart skipped a beat. The place was busy. But the iron gate at the edge of the patio was open, just like it was before. The owner was outside, wiping down a table. He looked up and saw her standing there. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look annoyed. He simply nodded his head toward the same small table near the window. "You're late," he said gruffly, but there was a twinkle in his eye. I walked slow," the girl whispered, stepping through the gate. "Sit," he said. "The customers are waiting." The girl sat down. She didn't have her cardboard sign this time. She didn't need it. The people around the patio, the ones who had been there last week and even some new ones, recognized her. A murmur went through the tables. "It's the singer," someone whispered. "She's back." The waiter came over immediately, without her even asking. He set down a glass of fresh orange juice and a basket of warm muffins. "For energy," he said with a wink. The girl drank the juice. It was sweet and tangy, waking her up. She ate a muffin, feeling the strength return to her limbs. She looked out at the crowd. There were more people today than last week. Word had spread. People were holding their phones up, ready to record. The owner stood by the kitchen door, watching her. He didn't have to tell her what to do. She knew. She stood up from the table. She walked to the same spot near the fence, where the acoustics were good. She closed her eyes for a moment, blocking out the world. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the cold air. And then she sang. This time, her voice was stronger. It rang out clear and loud, cutting through the city noise. She sang a different song this time, one that was full of hope. It was a song about birds flying high and the sun shining after the rain. She didn't just sing the notes, she felt them. She poured all the relief she felt, all the gratitude, all the new hope she had, into the melody. The crowd went silent. Just like last time, the power of her voice stopped them in their tracks. People stopped eating, they stopped talking, they just listened. The street musicians on the other corner stopped playing their guitars to hear her. Even the cars driving by seemed to slow down. When she finished the song, the silence lasted for a heartbeat, and then the applause exploded. It was louder this time. People clapped and cheered. A few people even stood up. The girl smiled, a real bright smile that showed her teeth. She sat back down to a plate of eggs and bacon, cooked just the way she liked it. She ate while the buzz of the crowd surrounded her. She felt safe. She felt proud. This became her routine. Every Saturday, rain or shine, the girl would appear at the bistro. And every Saturday, rain or shine, the girl would appear at the bistro. And every Saturday, the owner would have a table waiting for her. Over time, the regular customers got to know her. They would bring her things, sometimes a pair of warm gloves, sometimes a hat, sometimes a new notebook. They treated her like one of them. One particularly cold Saturday, just as winter was starting to really bite, the girl finished her song and sat down for her meal. The owner came over to her table, but he didn't just have a plate of food this time. He had a thick, heavy winter coat in his arms. It was a dark blue coat with a warm fleece lining and a hood. It looked brand new. "I think this is yours," the owner said, setting the coat down on the empty chair next to her. The girl stared at it. She reached out and touched the fabric. It was thick and soft. It's beautiful," she stammered. "But I don't have any money." "It's a gift," the owner said. "You earned it. You've been working hard." "But what about the food?" the girl asked, worried. "I still have to sing for the food, right?" The owner laughed, a deep, warm sound. "Yes, the deal is still on. One song, one plate. But the coat is a bonus. A signing bonus." The girl put the coat on. It was a little big, but it was the warmest thing she had ever worn. She pulled the hood up over her head and felt instantly protected from the wind. She looked at the owner, and for the first time, she realized that she wasn't just a customer to him, and he wasn't just a source of food. They were friends. "Thank you," she said, her voice muffled slightly by the hood. "Don't thank me," the owner said, wiping his hands on his apron. "You earned it. Now, eat your eggs. You look skinny." The girl laughed. It was a happy sound. She ate her breakfast, wearing her new coat, surrounded by people who cheered for her. She knew that life was still hard. She knew she didn't have a home like the people in the suits did. She knew there were still hungry days ahead. But she also knew that she had a voice that could move people. She had a place to go on Saturdays. She had a full belly and a warm coat. As she finished her meal and looked out at the busy city street, she didn't feel invisible anymore. She was a singer. She was a worker. She was a part of this city, just like everyone else. And as long as she had her voice, she knew she would be okay. The city was still loud and cold, but she had found her own melody to sing above the noise.